G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day, and so far you're also having a fantastic Monday. I know it's a Monday, but look, we've got into the week, and I hope that if you're in Australia, you're somewhere in air conditioning today. I know in at least my state, it's well over 40 degrees in some areas. Now, legends, as always, of course, we have a lot to go over, but I've got a massive week coming up as well. And of course, my chemotherapy starts this evening. Once I get off camera, I'm going to an appointment with my oncologist. That'll be the final tick of, yep, okay, you are ready to go. But I'm pushing back my medications actually to later in the evening. So I should be all right-ish for a couple of days to keep making videos, and then I'll be AWOL for some period of time until I start recovering. So I will be a little bit unreliable this week, but you're just going to have to bear with me. I am in my own war of attrition at the moment. But legends, we have a lot to go over. So of course we will look at the maps and we'll compare multiple maps, but I also want to go over some theories about what might be happening next and where the Russian command might actually want to be pushing and using their numerical advantage in their favor as well. So we'll talk over that. Of course, we have a miscellaneous folder. I want to go over what NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has said about the future of NATO, the war in Ukraine, and all over that, and add our 2 cents to that as well. And we need to look at what The Guardian is reporting as a desertion crisis. It's very interesting to see now that the mainstream media, who's been peddling one narrative for years upon years, is now starting to swing around to some of the realities of this and the consequence that this may actually have. So let's look in my miscellaneous folder. Now, some of the big news of the day, and we're not going to go too deep into this, at least in this video, maybe in the future, but of course, there has been a massive cut to US aid. And we are seeing that even Elon Musk is, of course, he's heading up this, but he's been very, very vocal about this. And it will be very interesting to see how this changes things in the informational space as he's revealing some of the documents on the back end towards media. Now, one thing I will say about this, and there was an article written about 3 or 4 days ago about the threat to independent media if this was cut. And what I will say, being independent media myself, that if the cutting of US aid is going to affect you, you are not independent, okay? So let's look over a couple of other bits and pieces. And while we're talking about aid, let's talk about aid. So Noel reports, and every other page being on both sides of the aisle, are reporting on this today. Of course, an interview with President Zelensky, where Ukraine has received $75 billion of the $177 billion in US aid. Where the rest is remains unclear, so missing about $100 billion. And he said it may exist only on paper. Some funds went to humanitarian programs via NGOs, but not to the state budget. So there's well over a missing $100 billion, which of course both sides will have their own ideas of where this has gone. Some of the top comments on this, which I completely see how they're seeing this, is talk like this will ensure no future aid, and Trump is going to love hearing this. And of course, Elon Musk, of course, working very closely with the Republican Party in the US, and he's been at all the events, everything, and he's the richest man on earth. He has already actually reshared this as well. I do think we may be seeing some cracks under pressure from the president of Ukraine for some of the statements made recently and things like this, that is really having an informational effect. Now, where has some of this money gone? Well, I'll actually start with my bottom line here. The military industrial complex, from doing a bit there myself previous to YouTube, it is corrupt as hell. It is unbelievably corrupt. From Australia to the US to Ukraine to everyone in between, and I'm guessing on the other side of the aisle in China and or Russia, I'm guessing it is the same as well. Well, you definitely hear about the corruption in the Russian state military companies as well. But yes, there's been a lot of money from a lot of areas been absolutely skimmed off the top. That happens with many, many different types of contracts. If you want a good one to look into why would Australia have G-Wagons in the army when 90% of the guys drive Toyota Land Cruisers. They are far more suited to being in Australian conditions, all the boys in the army are farmers who can fix them, that's a rabbit hole you maybe should go down. But if you're a taxpayer, maybe not. But where did a lot of this likely go? Well, there's going to be an unbelievable amount of money going into retooling US factories, both with machines, more wages, more hours, more employees, and backfilling those stocks. And of course, America being the ultra-capitalist country, that just means things are going to cost more and more. And if you put out, yep, Thales, you need to make X more equipment, it's going to go, well, it's going to be Y more price. And it's going to be very, very quick on that inflation of price. A lot of money going into research and development of weapons. Intelligence is unbelievably expensive. Everything from people on the ground through to satellites, through to the use of all of this as well, and just transporting back and forward. You think a first class ticket is expensive, try flying an Abrams tank somewhere. So let's look over one other bit that has been a lot of misconception, or misinformation I should say, about what we see in this bit of footage. So what we see here is a fibre optic FPV drone. We can tell by the overlay in the screen here and the smoothness of the footage, it's a fibre optic drone, and we can see demolitions equipment at the base of this bridge. Remember, bridges are very, very difficult to bring down. We see then the drone go into this. Of course, it cuts out, and then we see this bridge, massive shockwave, massive amount of then secondary shrapnel, primary shrapnel heading out from this as well, from this drone overhead, and that bridge has then been destroyed. Now, there's a lot of misconceptions around this. We see on some of these incredibly popular posts, 320,000 people have seen this, the armed force of Ukraine struck a railway bridge near Seversk, destroying an important Russian logistical artery. It is an important logistical artery. The bridge was used for supplying ammunition, equipment, and personnel. Now, this part is true. It is an important logistical artery. It's important for ammo, equipment, and personnel. But this is a Russian fibre optic drone and a bridge that Ukraine has rigged up. In case of withdrawal, it's ready to go and bring it down. And Vitaly here, he correctly shows where this bridge is, and I'll show you where this is. This is Seversk. This is Russian-controlled ground. 7.4 kilometers roughly to this bridge. So that's right at the max of what we believe those fibre optics are. And of course, the operators are not going to be dead on the front line, although we have got geolocated footage and then other maps showing that Russians are right up to about here, where my cursor is at the moment. Regardless, this is not a Ukrainian drone or a Russian logistics artery. This is 100% Russian drone. We can even see actually by the layout on the through the screen here as well, hitting that and taking down a bridge that, of course, Ukraine will be using for ammo, logistics, all of that in Seversk. If you want me to show you where that is, I'll show you on the map because I do have some updates in here, but it's this bridge right here on the outskirts of Seversk. Now, we need to talk about air defense and infantry, and this is Channel 5, a Ukrainian news channel with on YouTube, 3.27 million subscribers, so major news here. They have then shared this. Personnel from Patriot Air Defense Divisions have begun to be transferred to infantry units from the armed forces of Ukraine. Now, one thing is we don't know if these are the operators or people just in those units. But what we do know is that more and more people are being transferred out of things like the Air Force, air defense, things like this, to go into infantry as there is a critical manpower shortage. We're going to speak about how Russian tactics will try and benefit off that and what can be done. One day, a transfer order is formed. The next day, military personnel are trained abroad and transferred to another brigade. The YouTube title here was, despite Sersky's prohibition, air defense forces continue to be sent to the infantry. What we do know is it was said by Zelensky that this would stop immediately, and we know that it hasn't. The top comment here has said, my son, who has been serving in the air defense forces since the beginning of the war, shot down Shahed rockets, defended Kyiv, Minograd. They were removed and sent to the frontline assault brigade. And this is what we know. Ukraine has a shortage of infantry. Infantry is absolutely critical, so people are getting moved across. Of course, this comes as President Zelensky is calling for more air defense batteries as well. So let's have a look at the maps before we move on. So of course, if we zoom out on here, we have Ukraine in the center of your screen, the capital of Kyiv, red areas occupied since 22, purple since 2008. and 14. Of course, today we're going to be overlaying a lot from Mr. Suryak Maps. Now, in a post that I've shared across onto my Telegram as well, Suryak Maps, he talks about the grim or bleak future for his own mapping, that he's got a promotion at work and that there is a hell of a lot of work in this, especially for one person, and he doesn't have the goal of being an influencer or a YouTuber. My work is wonderful, even if it is hard, but each day comes closer to the end of the mapping. And he says, thank you for understanding. And we thank you, Suryak, for the fantastic work that you do on these maps. Legends, if you want to go and follow or support Suryak Maps, this is, of course, his X, where you can find him, and links to support him financially as well. I know he says he's not doing it for money in this, but of course that can definitely help properly independent media like this trying to cut through and tell it as it may be. Good, bad, up, down, left, right, going through some of the bullshit propaganda and the difficulties as well. Now, let's actually have a look at Pokrovsk straight away. And we have, of course, a lot of maps to show today. The red check that you're going to be seeing on this map, that is areas where Russia is gaining ground over the past 24 hours. The blue is the opposite of that, but we don't have any blue on this map today. Let's compare a few maps to see where things are lining up. So, Pokrovsk front, this day 1072. Of course, this is the Udashny front around Kotleny. So this red dot is Udashny, this red dot is Kotleny. What Suryak is showing is he's showing that the Ukrainian army has recaptured the Pokrovskoye mine ventilation shaft in here. The Russian army had new advances inside Nadayevka. So we can come down and we can have a look. This is around this sector in here. This is where Russia is advancing at this point, but Ukraine has recaptured one of the mine shafts here. Remember, a critical mine is this one right here, a massive portion of Ukraine's steel industry, making up a huge portion of their overall GDP. Also, then, map 1073. We can see movements out in Uspanivkia as well. Just a small movement on this map today. This is Uspanivkia. Then we come to the most recent Suryak map. Now, what he is showing, Russian army entered Srebeny from the south and took control over half the locality. These two maps are lining up. This is the red check here. So we can definitely confirm that movement. Let's talk about on the east of Pokrovsk around Baranivkia. No changes shown on this map today. We have a look then on the Suryak maps, and he is showing that there is movement just to the west of Baranivkia. So if we line up where this is this Vodian Druby in here. So he's saying that a lot of this area is now coming under control. They control over most of this locality. So there's grey zone up here. So showing that, as well as this intersection, which is here, which we know is going to be critical for further defense of areas such as Pokrovsk, Minograd, but also further east of Chasiv Yar, Toretsk, and everywhere in between there. Now, this map got shared as well, and it just shows, I think, more clearly of what we were sort of talking about yesterday. This is by GettermanAT on Twitter, but what it shows is the connection point of Pokrovsk. This is Pokrovsk in the center, and you can see where the roads and the rail are coming in, and how this is such a central location and a fantastic area for one, defending, but also if you then can occupy this, for using this as a staging point for further advances outwards. And how would Russia be looking at doing this? Well, let's have a look over what I was sent across. Having observed Russian behaviour in this war closely now for 3 years, and extrapolating on top of that what I think could possibly be the most profitable path forward for them, I think that we could likely see a larger effort to push west and northwest rather than an immediate concerted effort to take Pokrovsk itself. I've come to this conclusion as we know manpower is Ukraine's largest challenge at the moment. By pushing to the west and northwest, expanding the flank west of Pokrovsk, the Russians would force the Ukrainians to simultaneously defend against 1. An attack on Pokrovsk, 2. A push to the north into territory we know Russia wants, of course, towards areas like Kramatorsk. 3. A push west into the open ground, which could be strategically very consequential. 4. A swing back to the south to put additional pressure on other active fronts. So, before we move on, let me show you a roundabouts what we are talking about. So we spoke yesterday that west of Pokrovsk, there's a lot of open ground. To the north, there's a lot of smaller towns and industrial areas, but very important all the way through to areas like Kramatorsk. What he's saying here is what Russia may do is capitalize on Ukraine's large manpower shortages by pushing out and sort of bubbling out of here. And you get something like this. So they'll be pushing west, they'll be pushing to the north, and they'll be able to push to the east on Pokrovsk and potentially a push down to the south before actually doing an immediate, complete push on Pokrovsk itself. And the amount of assets and resources Russia's going to need to use there, and if you push in one direction, the amount of resources that Ukraine can move into one area to push back against it, that using this against active fronts to the south, we can see just down at Serbini here and Kursk front, there are active fighting there too, that you open up a lot more, but you have a center of gravity in here where it's easier for you to supply logistics out into these directions. Then if there are troops here and you need something across here, you've got to come right around, okay? This is very messy at the moment, but it might make a bit of sense. The reason I thought I'd just show you that is to somewhat try and visualize what is being said here. As such, while Russia could accumulate one large attacking force in this area and only needs to attack in one direction, Ukraine would be forced to defend against potential attacks in 4 directions, as we showed you. Being already short on men, this would tax their resources heavily. So you're expanding that front line, just distance of the front line, but a distance of logistics as well. Furthermore, as the Russians would be attacking out from the center of this bulge, and as the Ukrainians would be defending around a much larger distances around the perimeter, the Russians could more easily and quickly pivot these attacks in one direction or another, whilst Ukraine would have to move their reinforcements around much longer distances to counter these moves, giving Russia the advantage in maneuvering. So if you're the center, if you're the hub on a wheel, you have much shorter distance to move than if you are the rim, if that can make sense. So on these grounds, I believe that Russia will push out in this direction, not so much for the actual territory it might take, but rather for the benefit of tying up a disproportionately large number of Ukrainian troops, exacerbating their already acute manpower shortages and assisting in their attrition objectives. Remember, Russia is trying to attrit down the Ukrainian forces before they can have more larger moves on the front line and more positive outcomes for what they see for the war effort. So if you push out in a large area out in here, you are creating a smaller area for yourself, a larger area to defend, of course, a smaller area to potentially attack as well. And we can see on the front line, this is looking like what is being formed on that western flank of Pokrovsk. So thank you for seeing that across. I think that is very interesting and something we definitely need to keep an eye out for. So let's move to the south of here and look down on the Kursk pocket. Of course, we see red check moving through Dashny today, and this is being replicated over many different maps as well. So let's go back, day 1072. This is, of course, Andriivka up the top here and the Volcha River. And what we can see is out from Shevchenko that Surak is saying that the Russians have moved right up to the border of the Volcha River, as well as moving into the southern edge of Constantinople as well, not being shown on this map as well, to the north of Sukriyali by this, further then tightening up this pocket. The amount of maps showing different around Andriivka, and this one showing probably the most different to all the others. I am inclined to believe that Shevchenko to Andriivka is connected through here, that is not grey zone at this point in time. We can see that a little bit better here because it zooms up to the north. Further movements around to the north of Sukriyali, now catching up to very similar to where Deep State shows. Another map, we can see movement in the southern areas of Dashny. Remember, we had a geolocated footage that showed Russian soldiers in this locality. Further movement to the south of Dashny here, and movement then crossing this road to the north of Andriivka as well, fairly close to where it shows this peninsula of the former island boys. And then up to today's map, Syriac map, is saying that half of Dashny is coming under Russian occupation. So we can see that this front is still moving. These are still active front lines. These are still moving. That is why there may be a southern push if they were to bulge out from Udashny on the flank of Pokrovsk. And you need to fight to your strengths and your enemy's weaknesses. And Russia's strength is their numerical advantage on the front line at this point in time. So let's move up to Toretsk. Now, this map and Suryak are showing vastly different. Russian army made new advances inside the central part of Srebrenica. So this is right up in here. You can see where this turns out. This is Petrivka, so right up this road a couple of kilometers, while he's showing that the majority, if not all, of Toretsk has come under Russian occupation. So showing vastly different in here, even outside of the grey zone. Further, what he shows is the Russian army took full control of the salient between Srebrenica and Toretsk following the withdrawal of Ukrainian army from there. So again, because these are so different, it can actually be difficult to show where this is. So if we pull up this and we pull up this mine here is this one right here. So he's showing that this has moved all the way up here and across, and that all of this at this point in time, which if we get a ruler from this point to this point would be 5.6 kilometers, that all of this is now under Russian control. Anyway, what we need is geolocations or both maps to be showing this to confirm it, but he is saying that there are large shifts in here that we are not seeing on this. Now, before we head up into the north, let's just go down to then Velyka Novosilka in here. We're going to talk about this area again later in this video to do with manpower and desertions. Now, situation, Velyka Novosilka front, Russian army advanced west of Rozdolny, taking control of the fortifications adjacent to the road. So we just zoom out a little bit. Of course, we have Velyka Novosilka down in here. We see Novy Komar, this red dot, and Rozdolny, that he's showing that Russian forces have moved up onto this road, very similar to what the deep state is showing. So let's continue moving our way up on this map. We come to, of course, Chasiv Yar, somewhere I'm sure you are very familiar with. Now, he's showing many different changes on this front line today. Of course, we need to line up where things are. This area is right in here, and this spoil is here as well. And there has been movements. This is the center of Chasiv Yar up on this. Russian army controlled the gas station and reached the outskirts of Shevchenka and these district. There is grey zone of clashes with the Ukrainian army, which is constantly launching counterattacks. In addition, Russian forces advanced in this area. The situation here is clarified in favour of Ukrainian forces down to the south, where you see this blue dot. Of course, a lot of counterattacks in here because this is very, very important high ground for either force to hold for either defense or offensive actions further into the Donbass, especially on areas like Kramatorsk, everything from mortars to radios. So, Chasiv Yar, Russian army made new advances in this forest area. So very similar to where then we saw Ukraine, and the map then changed just to the south of here, right up in this forest where my cursor is at the moment. So the front line around Chasiv Yar is definitely moving. There's a hell of a lot of fighting there. Where exactly the front line sits at this point in time, it's very difficult to know, but in time, with geolocations, with other maps, it will become more clear. Let's move our way into Seversk. Now, this is the second time we've spoken about Seversk. Of course, this bridge in here. Bilohorivka is important to know, and there's Verkono Kamiansky as well, where there is geolocated footage of the Russians right up to about here. So let's have a look at this. Seversk. Russian army begun assault on this area, taking control of the eastern part of the locality, right where we showed you, sort of where this road turns up to the north, right in here. That is where we saw that geolocated footage the other day. Of course, we need to point out Bilohorivka and this large pile here as well from one of the mines. Of course, any high ground is very important. Seversk front, during the last 4 days, Russian army started another offensive to capture Bilohorivka, while clashes with the Ukrainian army are taking place at the ruins of the locality and the Chalk Quarry Hill. Russian forces made a series of advances south of it. So to the south, and this Zolotarivkia, that the Russians are pushing north out of here to the quarry. We can see where the front line is showing on Suryak, right up against this quarry, where Deep State is showing that that is grey zone and green zone too. But we know there's a hell of a lot of clashes in this direction, and we see, of course, those strikes as well, which will have an impact down the line. Let's move our way up and we have Turnin. We can see a large amount of red check on this map today, and we can confirm this due to what Syriac map is showing in the direction of Kolodiazi as well. Then we're going to come up into the northeast, where we did show that yesterday Deep State map showed more Russian control than actually the Syriac map in this direction, and he has updated this. This is the area we're talking about of this Novomilyansk situation northeastern front. Russian army took full control over the locality of Novomilyansk and the surrounding positions until Dovrychnya, where the Russian forces continue advancing north of this locality. So they're pushing to the north here and, of course, out to the west as well, further through the Kharkiv Oblast. We have a second Syriac update in here today, though, that during the last 4 days, Russian army made new advances south of Zapadne, taking control over the hills which overlook farms of Kalinove. So this is very difficult to see just due to the amount of labelling on this map. So let's line up a couple of things. What we're looking for is see where this road comes around on this dogleg right in here, that it is in line or just south of this bottom part, connecting where this road connects to this 6 ways we have spoken about to the west of Sinkivkia. So if the Syriac map is correct, it is showing something along the lines of this. And if this is to be true, of course, this is advancing on the northern edge of Kupiansk, some 3.2 kilometers or 2 miles. So that is significant as well, but that is not being shown at this point. But that's all the maps I have for you today. We spoke about Pokrovsk, and we spoke then about that Russia may look to lean on its numerical advantage of men and how that can be used. And we know that there are lots of different factors that are causing manpower shortages in Ukraine, from losses to desertions, command failures, and of course morale too. So let's have a look over what The Guardian is saying here. When Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine 3 years ago, Viktor was ready to die for his country. When I arrived, I was super motivated. If necessary, I would give my life. Gradually, however, he became disillusioned. The battle was furious. The Russians would smash our positions to the ground. Senior Ukrainian commanders gave unrealistic orders. Then, while he was defending a ruined building, a panel fell on his shoulder. After receiving injections to reduce the pain, he was told to return to the front. I realised I'm a nobody, just a number. In May that same year, Viktor left his position to seek further medical treatment. He did not come back. His commander marked him down as AWOL. Viktor is one of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers who have abandoned their units. The exact figure is a military secret, but we know in the courts it is in the tens of thousands that are being put forward for desertion or AWOL. But officials concede the number is large. They say it is understandable when tired troops have served for months without a proper break, but also given unrealistic orders and incompetent command staff as well. This reminds me of a quote from Erwin Rommel. The best form of welfare for the troops is first-class training, for this saves unnecessary casualties. The soldier has a right to expect competent leadership. He will follow such leadership to the death if he feels confident in it. And exactly what I showed you yesterday of that guy saying there was no threat of Velyka Novosilka being encircled, next thing it encircled, and now saying, oh, it's weird seeing the Russians work to gain the flanks of an area, which if you are looking at these maps at all, you would see that's not weird at all. It's being done again and again and again. And that incompetence absolutely will lead to further people walking off the line, as we have seen. The issue of desertion has made headlines in Ukraine. Last week, the government launched an investigation into 155th Mech. As we know, hundreds into 1,700 completely just went AWOL from that. And in my opinion, understandably, given the problems. After 3 years of war, Ukraine is desperately short of soldiers, especially infantry. This has made it easier for Russia's army to advance in the east. There are structural issues too. New brigades have been built from scratch. They performed poorly or didn't perform at all. Zelensky recently ordered a change in policy, with inexperienced recruits integrated into existing battalions, and it should have always been this. We know from the most simple doctrine about protracted and attritional war, you don't form new brigades. You then refill existing brigades to let experience proliferate. Otherwise, experience will be lost and it is a waste of time. We know that from the very basics, but we have also heard about what is happening in air defense of what I showed you in the beginning too. So will we see Zelensky let go of the PR of forming new brigades for this? Well, we'll wait and see. Now, Viktor was once a trained sniper. He now runs a garage fixing military vehicles. saying everybody is tired, the mood has changed. People used to hug soldiers in the streets. Now they worry about being conscripted. Victor added there was a severe lack of frontline manpower. In February 2023, he was given a 10-day break, only to be recalled a day after he got home. And this is what we hear again and again, is rotation, demobilisation, and the ability to have breaks too. Another deserter, Oleksiy, said he took part in Ukrainian offensives in the southern Mykolaiv and Kherson regions. During the winter of 22, he had a row with the new commander, applied unsuccessfully for a transfer, then he got hurt, saying, "I reached boiling point. I decided to go where nobody can find me." Now, we see this as well. This gentleman talking, this Andriy Hirabiuk, he's the commander of the infantry battalion of the 110th Mechanized Brigade. Now, it says here, the fighting in the town of Velyka Novosilka. No, the 110th was left behind or abandoned in Velyka Novosilka, as we know from the video of the guys there saying that they were just left as the Russians were pushing up. Now, he says soldiers went AWOL pretty frequently, and some return and some don't. It's about morale more than injury. They need a psychological reset. They go and see their families and reappear after a couple of months. Did he understand them? I don't sympathise and I don't condemn. His brigade last week took the unusual step of saying it was critically short of personnel. So how bad must it be before you make it public? It had enough drones and artillery, but no infantry. This is something that you won't hear on the channel saying it's just all American weapons. That's the reason. No, they have enough drones, they have enough artillery, they don't have enough men. At a time of constant Russian attacks, we need to break the stereotype that if you join up, you'll be dead in 5 minutes. Simple things keep you alive, like digging in, cleaning your weapons, and paying attention during your first aid training. Thing is though, there's stereotypes built of numbers and statistics as well. And what we know is the lifespan for a conscript on the front line is very, very short. Sometimes from a few days to a week, depending on the sector of the front line. And you can't just put this back on them too. Yes, there are things you can keep alive, but the command also, they have to be competent at what they do and be able to withdraw out of a sector too, just like the 110th being left in Avdiivka to break out themselves or left in Velyka Novosilka to a tragic end. We all saw the videos. The recruitment crisis could be solved, and this is from this Ola Restalova. She has been in a job created by Zelensky as Ukraine's Commissioner for Protecting Service Members. She added, if Ukraine's allies sent their own troops, if they did not, and Kiev fell, Putin would keep going. She said, as I see it, it is Europe's armies that are absent without leave. They don't understand or don't want to understand that this is their war too. But you need to be looking at the command that is causing a lot of these issues as well. It's not just the guys, and it's not just NATO as well. It might take a very difficult inward look at senior leaders as well, from middle to the top two. Now, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has interviewed with Bild. He said some interesting things in this. The question was asked, are we losing the war against Russia in Ukraine? The front is moving in the wrong direction, but at what price? The Russians are paying for it with 1,000 to 1,500 people a day who are dying or seriously wounded. And yet the Russians are not achieving their goals. And our job is to ensure that they never achieve their goals. So no, Ukraine is not losing. And we must support them in getting into a position of strength. Again, Russia is not the only ones taking casualties on this front line, or large casualties on this front line, but that is being ignored. This is an attritional battle. Russia does have numerically more soldiers on the front line. Ukraine has a desertion crisis, an AWOL crisis, a manpower shortage. Russia are deploying more men to the front line, as well as have a large artillery advantage and advantage in medium-range strikes, things like FABs and Iskanders as well. The casualties, I think, at best, may be 1-to-1, if not reversed. So if you're taking this standpoint in a war of attrition, it's not looking good, Mark. Are we sending Ukraine to a slow death? The Russians are firing more, but we don't want to supply Taurus cruise missiles. Now, in this, he doesn't answer the question about are we sending Ukraine to a slow death. He just talks about other longer-range missile systems. Again, that will make strategic difference. It'll make good headlines. But at the end of the day, if you do not have infantry, people are just going to be moved out of those positions to this. He doesn't answer both of these questions. Is peace with the Russians even possible in the future? Are negotiations with Putin already underway? We must ensure that Putin can never, ever again conquer even 1 square kilometre of Ukraine. But he hasn't spoken about, is peace possible? Are negotiations already underway? Now, if you listen to Mr. Trump, he says that there are some conversations going on as well. And following war, many people can be shocked at how quickly relations can actually be made. Look at Germany and Japan, for instance, but completely avoided those 2 questions. And how is that supposed to work? Okay, putting Ukraine in the best position possible, position of strength, not a single inch, of course, of territory ever being made by the Russians again. Step 1. We have to make sure that Ukraine is in the best possible position. We have to continue to support them with weapons and train their soldiers, but soldiers also need to be sent to that training to be armed as well. And that is manpower shortage we're seeing, and that is critical. And if they want to negotiate peace one day, they have to bring Putin to the table. I can't describe to you exactly how these talks will go. I already have ideas about what this composition could look like. But we don't want to make Putin any smarter than he already is. We're making it a little secret. Only the end is certain. Putin will never try again after this. So saying that there's some secret plan here that will put in a position of strength, some 4D chess, and that he'll never be able to do it again. Strap in for however this looks, Marky Mark. By 2029, Putin will be able to attack NATO. Is it a good idea to take us on? Putin should not think about that for a single second. It would have disastrous consequences for him. Nor has the Kremlin ever said that they want to take on NATO either or go through that territory. Our economy is 20 times larger than Russia's. We need additional production lines, additional ships, more ammo, more Leopard tanks, more fighter jets, more weapons throughout NATO territory, from America to Turkey. More money, more industrial production. Then we can manage to deter him. Then he will never dare to attack us. And this is the paradox that Mark Rutte is living in, is this idea that some weapons and some more training to Ukraine will defeat the Russians, but at the same time that they are a legitimate military threat to be able to push through to Brussels too. And that is just a paradox. But what we need to look at in this is our economy is 20 times larger than the Russians, but we have to look at the purchasing power parity as well. Of yes, but a Leopard vehicle or an F-35 or whatever is significantly more expensive as well. The video I did with an economist at the top link, he describes this really well. That yes, it is large, but you can't just compare dollar to dollar. You need to look at what you get for that dollar as well. You also need to look at alliances, like economic alliances like BRICS and how that is growing, and potential military alliances in the future with countries like China. Is that a promise? Yes. But that will be decided in Europe, and we don't have much time left. So Europe needing to spend more money. Of course, we've seen President Trump's position on this. What I will say, though, is Russia's individual threat. So we're not talking BRICS and we're not talking any other military alliances, just Russia itself. Their threat to NATO and the EU has been and will be and continue to be, and growing, I believe, the threat is ideology. Many Europeans, many people in the West are looking for a more traditionalist government. Have a look at some of the votes recently from Romania to the US. Have a look at Slovakia and Hungary. And what Russia is trying to do is pin themselves as the last bastion of traditional European values. People don't understand, and Mr. Rutte and these other leaders here, these other, I'll say, more postmodernist leaders, I don't think they're seeing this either. That is very attractive to, of course, a lot of people. And I think a lot of people in Europe are being disgusted by their governments and the EU around things like immigration, around some ideas that aren't objective, that everything is relative. And then Russia's trying to pin themselves that. And I say militarily, the threat is not there to NATO, conventionally at least. Ideologically, that is a huge, huge threat. And we could see countries like Slovakia or Hungary or Romania float into Russia's sphere in the future too, as these two different ideologies then move further and further apart. We don't know what happens in decades. Anyway, legends, look after yourselves. Sorry there's a lot of cuts in this. I had to restart a couple of times. I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.